Joining me now is Congressman Jimmy Panetta, a former naval intelligence officer and a member of the Armed Services Committee, and Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, a former CIA case officer who serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman Panetta, I'll start with you. Congress has before them a request for billions of dollars in emergency assistance for Ukraine on the humanitarian front, on the military front. Are you confident that Congress can pass that in time to get it to the Ukrainians while they still have a government that can use it?
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. I appreciate this opportunity, and obviously good to appear with my colleague, Representative Spanberger. Definitely. I think Washington's voice needs to be a part of what he was calling for, and I think the way we can be included in that is by passing these two bills that we're going to have next week coming up here. Obviously, we're going to have $10 billion to decide on, $5 billion going to armament assistance and NATO assistance, and then, of course, $5 billion going to humanitarian assistance. And I do believe that's something that we'll be able to get behind, Democrats and Republicans, in addition to the Ban Russian Energy Imports Act that we're going to be discussing next week as well, which literally is going to cut off Russian oil coming into the United States, which I think is an important step. I was worried about, Hawaii and Alaska, as most of our imports go, Russian imports go there. However, you have both senators from both states on this bill already in the Senate version. So look forward to pushing those two bills forward.
I had a long conversation with Brian Schatz about that bill. I want to come back to that. But first, I want to bring in Congresswoman Spanberger. Congresswoman, NATO allies are being pressured, including by President Zelensky, to consider instituting a no-fly zone over Ukraine. And the NATO chief has dismissed that. Secretary of State Blinken said today it's not a possibility, really. Where do you stand on this? Is that something that should be meriting further discussion, or is that just a fast track to the U.S. being fully involved in this war?
Well, I think when we're talking about what does it mean for the U.S. to be fully involved, we're talking about would we take action that would trigger Article 5 and essentially lead us directly towards a world war involving NATO allies. So it isn't specifically just whether or not the United States thinks that there needs to be a no-fly zone, whether or not the United States might render that type of aid. But would the United States be pulling our NATO allies straight into an armed conflict that would take on the whole of Europe? I think what we heard in President Zelensky's comments were a call for help, a call for aid, a call for all eyes to continue to be on Ukraine, rendering the aid that we can, humanitarian aid, support with lethal aid, because the Ukrainians have demonstrated an unbelievable will to fight, to protect their freedom, to stand up for their country. And certainly everyone across the world should be inclined to support them to that end. So I'm with Jimmy Panetta, my congressman, my colleague from California, in saying that I do believe we will quickly get this through Congress to provide the support, humanitarian and lethal aid to Ukraine that they need. We also need to heed the call of President Zelensky and ensure that all eyes are on Russia, accounting for the fact that they are attacking civilians. They are bombing schools. They are bombing hospitals. They are recklessly and lethally just decimating cities. And we have to be attuned to what this means, not just for the Ukrainian people, but for the rest of the world and democracies everywhere.
And the world is watching it. Congressman Panetta, I want to go back to the discussion here about the potentially banning Russian oil imports. As you well know, the global energy market is, in fact, global. If we don't buy Russian oil, someone else is likely to. We know the White House is opposed to cutting off shipments here to the U.S. Is this, for lack of a better way of saying it, just a way for Congress to kind of feel like it's doing something here to Vladimir Putin? Is it just another political hot topic, or could that actually make a difference here?
Look, I wish it was that easy. It's not. This is actually leadership by example, and that's what we want to do. You have the 11th largest economy in the world. 60% of that economy is about oil and gas exports. That's why we have to go after that. And I think by putting forward this bill, which bans these imports, we're leading by example. Now, look, hopefully Europe will follow soon. We're starting to see the will from our European partners to step up in a number of ways that we couldn't imagine, but they're already doing that, so you think they will. Now, look, what I've heard is the common response is, well, China will start to buy their stuff. Look, I think China is recalculating based on what's going on here in the in the underestimation of what happens when you attack a democracy, when the overestimation on the Russian military, and the underestimation of the international resolve against this type of unjustified and unprovoked attack. I think China is recalculating what it's going to do going forward in its association with Russia, but also looking at Taiwan as well, realizing the economic consequences of what can happen when you invade a democracy.
Congresswoman Spanberger, I'm going to give you the last 40 seconds or so that I have here, but build on what Congressman Panetta was just saying there. For the imports sanctions to, or blocking imports to work, for our efforts to go after oligarchs to work, this has to be a continued effort with all the allies. How do you view the way our government has managed our allies thus far?
I think so far we've seen the most extraordinary coordination ever among our allies, our NATO partners, our security partners throughout the world in our coordination on sanctions, in our coordination and our denunciation of Russia's attack on Ukraine. And we need to keep up the pressure. As Jimmy was saying, we need to lead by example. There's a variety of pieces of legislation that we're working on in Congress to say not only are we sanctioning, but we are seizing and then we are forfeiting the assets of oligarchs. We have to make sure that every person, any individual who gives power to Vladimir Putin, who enables his actions and his war efforts against the Ukrainian people, civilians throughout the country, that those people need to feel lasting impact of their choices to enable this sort of just brutality.
All right. Mr. Panetta, Ms. Spanberger, members of Congress from the Democratic side of the aisle, thank you both for coming on.